Hi, I'm Mike with Southwest Grain and Lemmon. Today I'll be talking to you about variable rate technology, or VRT. Um, Over the years, I've heard a lot of farmers talk about how farming is kind of like gambling. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to be talking about how we can try to increase our odds of success by using VRT. So first off, I just want to step through how we typically manage our fields here. Our standard management approach. So first off, where we need to start each season, in my opinion, is with a composite soil test. So that composite soil test showed 22 pounds per acre of nitrate. The next thing we did was we set our yield goal. We're raising sunflowers on this field, and we're shooting for 2,000 pound sunflowers. The next thing that we do is we take that composite soil test and our yield goal, and from that we set our fertilizer application. So on this year, we spread 165 pounds of urea and 20 pounds of mez. So we'll fast forward into our harvest, and we ended up with a average yield of just over 1,600 pounds. So it was a little bit lower than what our yield goal was. But we take and pencil out those things, our inputs and our average yield, and it actually made us money, $93 an acre at $24 per hundredweight flowers. So, a lot of times this is kind of where we end the conversation. We have our inputs, we have our yield, we made some money, and we're going to start again next year. So that's where most conversations end, but this is where we're going to try to dig in a little bit deeper into what's happening on this field. Here's our yield map, and as you can see, there are a lot of different colors going on. The color is used to show yield values, from the red being very low yielding to the green being very high. So then I took this yield map and I broke it into 3 equal area zones based on the yield. Again, we have our red zone, which was on average yielding fairly low at 600 pounds. And then our green area, which is our high yielding zone, and it averaged over 2,700 pounds an acre. So that's doing really well there. And that means that, we're going from 600 pounds to over 2,700. That's a lot of variability. So I took this and did a little bit of math and figured out our variability percentage is just about 65% here. You can see our variability was different and our inputs were the same. So what's going on here is we're putting enough fertilizer for 2,000 pound flowers on our 2,700 pound flowers, but we're putting enough fertilizer for 2,000 pound flowers on our 600 pound flowers. So we have a huge difference in what our efficiency of our inputs are here. We're maybe not feeding it enough where it could do even better, and we're feeding it too much where it's not using it. So what really kind of shows what's going on in this picture is when we bring in our return, our net return per yield zone. And you can see that zone 3 is really carrying a lot of weight here, and zone 1 is really pulling us down. if we could try to kind of skinny up some of these inputs on zone 1, we'd be helping ourselves out. So another layer of data that's showing us what's going on here is our post-harvest soil test. So this was the first year where we actually did a zone soil test. So we went in and each one of those zones had their own soil test, the low, the medium, and the high. There were 3 soil tests done. And it uncovered something that a lot of times kind of goes overlooked, which is way too much residual nitrate in that low yielding zone. And something to think about is that low yielding zone, it doesn't yield. I'm calling it the low yielding zone. So it's not doing much with that fertilizer that we're putting there. And also, nitrate is what they call a leaky nutrient. So it's both not doing much there and then it's going away. It's a poor investment. It's not a good place to be putting our money, because in this sandy hilltops, there's not much to hold on to the nitrate and not much can use it there. But then we go down into maybe some more alkali or saline areas, and that nitrate's coming down and actually making the situation worse. It's going to denitrify, and then it's probably going to end up leaching, because that's how it ended up there, was the leaching process. So anyway, not a good place to be putting our nitrogen. So this brings me back to the blackjack metaphor. We got 3 different hands going on here. We have a hand with a really high probability of success. Our highly productive areas are going to be year in, year out, just our better producing areas. Where our low productivity areas, those sandy hilltops, those alkali areas, they're just going to consistently be underperforming. So why are we betting the same on all of these hands? Why aren't we doing things a little differently here based on what our odds of success are? So now we're going to talk about variable rate management and how we can try to improve our efficiency. That begins with understanding our variability in these fields. Variability happens, and if we don't understand it, we can't account for it. So, that's why we're going out there and just spreading the same rate on all these areas, is because, we're not sure what things are going to yield, and we want to put it out there just in case. So the first step in understanding our variability is looking at this data layer here. It's 1 year of harvest data. It has really high variability at 65%. And so that's where we ask ourselves, is this enough information? Is it going to tell us with confidence what's going to happen next year? And I just don't think it's enough information. We're looking for consistent inconsistency. Like, we can see inconsistency here, but is it going to be consistently inconsistent? Where these good and poor areas are going to be? I don't think that we can figure that out from just one data layer on 1 year. So let's take a closer look at yield variability. So the year that we've been looking at was near 65% variability, but then we look at 2 other years of this same field and we're looking at 32% and a 27%, and a 3-year average of about 42% variability, which is still pretty high. So then I took 15 other fields and I came up with what their variability score was. And the 15 field average was 30.8%. So what I can gather from this is maybe this field is just a little bit more variable than most. So, the smart money's on saying there's a little bit higher than average variability in this field. So the next thing I want to look at is field variability. And how I figure that out is looking at NDVI data. NDVI data is essentially it's satellite reflectance data, which, to make a long story short, it is basically seeing, where are these areas where there's, healthy, dense vegetation growing, and where are the areas that just aren't growing as much, and from that we get this color scale that I'm looking at here. So each one of these maps on the bottom it represents a year, and each one of those years have a lot of good images that make them up. So I'm going in and I'm averaging each of the images within each of the years and then stacking them up next to each other. And you can see that consistently there's some areas that are doing better and some areas that are doing worse consistently. Some years there's higher yield, some years there's lower yield, but relatively you can kind of start to pick out where these good areas and where these poor areas are. So field variability, we're taking that and we're creating our management zones. We have enough data there to feel fairly confident about where our low and where our high yielding areas are. And that's kind of what this management map is it's the green is I'm fairly confident that this is going to be consistently better. And the red says year in, year out, this is just going to be a poor area, and there's reasons why, and they're going to be the same year over year. So take that yield variability that we looked at first. And like I said, it's a little bit more variable than average, and we put out a 33% yield variability that felt safe. So if we went with a 1,800 pound yield goal for sunflowers, which seemed like a reasonable yield goal, and we add that 33% variability, we end up with our low zone having a yield goal of 1,200 pounds, where our high yielding zone, our zone 3, has a yield goal of 2,400 pounds. And this just seems a lot more reasonable once we look at these areas and think about what they can produce. These yield goals seem a lot more reasonable, a more reasonable guess as to what they might produce. So we've looked at each of the management strategies, the standard, flat rate management, and then our variable rate, and what goes into each of them and why we do what we do. So now let's compare these two management strategies against each other. So again, we'll take in our input costs. As you can see on the flat rate side, those input costs are staying the same. But over on our variable rate, our VRT managed field, those input costs are changing. And with those changed input costs, they come, there comes a difference in the costs of these areas. So in our zone 1, we're actually pulling back our fertilizer and saving around $45. Zone 2, we're pulling back just a little bit, not as much, because those are maybe a little bit better area. But then in our zone 3, our highly productive area, we're actually taking some of that savings and investing it in a better place, a place that might produce some more return for us more consistently. So here's just one more image, and it's showing us what are the yields in these areas and what are the differences based on those yields. So in our zone 1, where we had 600-pound flowers, we're pulling back more than 50% of the nitrogen and a large amount of the input cost in that area. So we're trying to make it lose less. But then down here in our high yielding zone, we're actually adding 35 pounds of urea, and we're adding some more population there because we feel like that kind of environment can support it. And you know, those added inputs, they don't come free. You know, you're putting more money there. But with that added money, I feel that you stand a good chance of getting more return. So by adding 35 pounds of urea, we're looking at NDSU's economic return model. And NDSU says that on the yield curve, the yield by fertilizer curve, as we add more and more fertilizer, that curve begins to flatten out. And kind of our optimal, our top spot of our max amount of nitrate that can be profitable, that can give us good return, is 120 pounds. So that's nitrate. So then we're adding 35 pounds of urea to max out that number. And if you look at AgVise's data and what they derive their yield goals from, they show that 1 pound of nitrate can get you 20 pounds of yield, 20 pounds of sunflower yield. So that 20 pounds of yield for 1 pound of nitrate isn't going to happen all the way up to 1,000 pounds of nitrate. Like, that's why we have the curve. The more you put in there, you know, the less you're going to be coming back at a certain point. That's the law of diminishing returns. But up to 120 pounds, I feel pretty confident that we're going to be getting at least that 20 pounds per pound of nitrate. And you might even get more, because what you're seeing here is we were feeding this for 2,000 pounds and it gave us 2,700. So that high yielding environment, it's actually very efficient with our nitrate. So we might even get more than 20 pounds per pound of nitrate. But anyway, going down a rabbit hole there. So now we're going to take these fields and look at them at a whole field scale. And we'll start with just our basic inputs. And as you can see, that's kind of where the story ends for our flat rate field. We have our input cost, our gross return, and I have to silence this call, so 1 second. Anyway, on the variable rate field, we keep on adding to this equation, to this number here. So we have some savings that actually came in with our variable rate input. We saved quite a bit per acre in our urea, and then we added a little more urea in that high productivity zone, but we're still saving some money. And then we actually had a little bit of money go toward our prescription writing costs and our VRT spreading, but still, you know, relatively small costs when you look at it on a per acre basis. And that led to a savings of over $9 per acre. And then if you trust my yield increase ideas, you know, I think it's fairly safe to say that we're going to be increasing our yield and making a little bit more money in that area. And based on my figures, you know, we're making over $25 more per acre because of that yield increase. And that's not just in that zone, that's a whole field profitability increase. So what does that mean? You know, you look at these two management scenarios, and with the savings and the yield increase, and all the costs that are associated with variable rate, I'm showing that it's fairly reasonable to see a almost $35 per acre advantage just because of how we're managing our inputs and maybe being a little more efficient there. Okay, so to try and pull things together here, I just want to show you a couple things. Again, here's our first year zone soil test. This was the first zone soil test right after flat rate management, and it showed that we had a lot of residual nitrate in that poorest yield zone. And then zone 2 and zone 3 especially. Zone 3 we're really kind of sucking it dry. And to me that shows, you have more than you need in your low yielding zone and not enough where you could actually stand to gain from it. But then this is our second year zone soil test, which is kind of interesting. After a year of variable rate management where we took this first year zone soil test, we added to it a reasonable yield goal and added our fertilizer in different amounts to the different yield environments, we have a lot flatter residual nitrate numbers. And I would say that what is, the best improvement here is that we don't have so much residual nitrate laying around in that area of the field where it's going to get lost and or not used. It's just, we're not investing so much in that area. We're just kind of trying to get across it and lessen our losses there. But then, as you slide down in our yield goal areas, maybe we could have pushed zone 2 a little harder and given it a little more fertilizer. But zone 2 can be pretty variable. But zone 3, that's kind of where I'm focusing here. Zone 3, we've seen that it can really pull some yield there. And 24 pounds of residual nitrate, that's kind of showing me that it had enough. It had what it needed to give us the yield that it could pull that year. And that's what we want to do. We want to not be laying it out in zone 1, but putting it where we really can stand to gain from it. And so that process, in my mind, it shows an increase in efficiency. We're going from inefficient management of some areas to efficiency. And through that efficiency, what comes along for the ride is an increase in our returns. If we're not wasting our money, if we're investing our money, again, we stand to gain more. And I figured we're right around that $35 per acre of an increase in return, at least this year, and with the costs of everything, the inputs and the grain and that. So I just want to end with a couple questions. I want just, if you ask yourself one thing after this presentation, I want you to ask yourself, where am I putting my money? Am I putting it where I have the best odds of success? Am I able to maybe limit more my potential losses? Am I putting a big bet on a hand that just doesn't have good odds? That's what we need to think about, because it's more than just what our yield is. It's about how efficient we're being. So that's kind of the end of that. And there's a lot more to it. And every zone, every field, every farm, they're all different. But, if you want to dig into these things deeper, you just need to reach out to one of your Southwest Grain agronomists. Because, here at Southwest Grain, we have the tools and we have the equipment. And more than that, we know the strategies that we can use to make these more efficient practices fit on your farm. You don't have to have the latest and greatest equipment. That's all fun and great and we can do more with it. But anyone has the ability to variable rate their nitrate, and that's the biggest cost on farm. So if you just come in and we start making some zones and looking at how we can variable rate that input, really all it's going to cost you is a couple bucks for a prescription and 25 cents more to spread it, on top of what it would be to just flat rate spread it. So really it's just a little bit more planning and not a lot more money, and we can get you into a situation that I think could fit your farm better. So if you're interested in this, just again reach out to your local Southwest Grain agronomist. So thanks for your time.